The night sky above the barren planet was filled with smoke and falling ash. The land stretched out like a graveyard, broken rocks and twisted metal scattered across the surface. The human explorer stepped out of his small landing craft and looked around. His boots sank slightly into the black sand as he moved forward, his visor glowing faintly in the dark. He was not supposed to be here. His mission had been simple: survey the outer rim and mark resources. But the emergency signal had changed everything. A weak distress beacon had reached his ship only hours earlier, a desperate cry in the void. He followed it, and now he stood at the edge of destruction. In front of him, the alien ship lay in ruins. Its hull was torn apart, flames still licking at the shattered sides. The air was thick with the bitter smell of burned metal and fuel. Sparks jumped from broken wires. The silence was heavy, almost crushing. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence after screams have died away. The human moved carefully, scanning the wreckage with his handheld sensor. No life signs appeared at first, only fire, broken walls, and shadows dancing in the smoke. He almost turned back, believing everyone on board had perished. But then, something faint. A sound. It was not the groan of metal, not the hiss of gas escaping from a pipe. It was softer, fragile. A cry. The man froze. His heart beat faster. He turned his head, listening hard. The cry came again, weak but unmistakable. It was the sound of a child. Without hesitation, he rushed forward. His boots clanged on twisted plates of steel as he climbed into the ship's torn frame. The flames painted the walls red, heat pressing against his suit. He coughed as smoke slipped through the cracks in his mask. He pressed on, guided only by that faint cry. Through the wreckage, he found her. An alien woman knelt beside a broken support beam, her body shaking with exhaustion. Her arms wrapped tightly around a small bundle, a child hidden in layers of torn cloth. Her eyes, wide and full of fear, locked onto the human as he appeared. For a moment, neither moved. The human saw her skin, pale silver under the flickering flames, and the strange markings across her face. She was clearly not of his kind. She tried to rise but collapsed again, too weak. Her lips moved, whispering something in a language he could not understand. But her meaning was clear. She was begging for help. The human lowered his weapon and raised both hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. His voice was calm but firm. "It's all right. I won't hurt you." The alien woman clutched her child tighter, still unsure. But the fire behind her roared, sending sparks over her head. She flinched and shielded the baby with her own body. The human understood. If they stayed here, they would die. He moved closer, carefully, step by step. The floor creaked under his, boots threatening to give way. He reached out, offering his hand. She hesitated for a long moment, her eyes wet with tears, then finally placed her trembling fingers in his. Her skin was cold, her strength nearly gone. The human pulled her up and steadied her, then looked at the child. The little one was crying softly, its tiny face streaked with soot. He adjusted his pack and motioned toward the exit. "We need to go, now." With effort, he guided her through the wreckage. Each step was a battle. Fire blocked the halls, fallen beams forced them to crawl, and collapsing walls threatened to trap them inside. Twice he nearly carried her when her legs failed. The baby whimpered, the sound echoing through the dead ship. At last they stumbled out into the open air. The woman collapsed against a rock, clutching her child to her chest. She coughed hard, her voice raw. The human knelt beside her, scanning the area for enemies. The distress beacon had not been random. This ship had not fallen by accident. The holes in the hull were from weapons fire. Someone had attacked them. The human tightened his grip on his rifle. Whoever had done this might still be close. But then he looked at the alien woman again. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the dark, full of pain and desperation. She was not a threat. She was a widow, alone, with no one to protect her, no one but the small child she held, and now, him. The wind blew across the empty wasteland, carrying ash and silence. The human stood, tall and steady, and knew one thing for certain. If he walked away, they would not survive the night. He had found them beside a burned ship, mother and child clinging to life in the shadows of war. And in that burning silence, a choice was made. The cold night wind swept across the wasteland, carrying the sharp smell of smoke and burning fuel. The human stood watch, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. He had brought them out of the fire, but the danger was not over. The wreck of the alien ship still glowed behind them, a broken monument of death. Somewhere out there, whoever had destroyed it might return. The alien woman sat on the ground, leaning against a rock. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her arms never loosened around the child. The baby whimpered softly, small and fragile in her embrace. Ash streaked her pale silver skin, and her long dark hair hung tangled over her shoulders. She looked, more ghost than living being, but her eyes, wide and wet, watched the human with a strange mixture of fear and hope. He knelt beside her, lowering his weapon. "You're safe now," he said, even though he was not sure if she understood. Her lips moved. She whispered something in her own tongue, the words light and broken. He did not know the meaning, but the tone carried enough. A plea, a desperate request. She reached out one trembling hand and touched his arm. The human froze, startled by the gesture. Her grip was weak, but it carried the weight of trust. She was giving him something more powerful than words. She was asking him to protect not just herself, but her child. The baby stirred, its tiny fingers curling around a piece of torn cloth. The sound of the infant's cry pierced the silence, high and sharp. The woman hushed it quickly, rocking gently, despite her weakness. She looked at the human again, tears in her eyes. The human felt a heaviness in his chest. He had fought battles before, faced enemies without fear. But this moment was different. This was not about survival or orders. This was about life, small, innocent life, that could end in a single heartbeat if he chose wrong. He opened his pack and pulled out a water flask. Carefully, he offered it to her. She hesitated for a second, then accepted it with both hands. She sipped slowly, then tilted it to the baby's lips. The child drank greedily, a faint sound of relief escaping. For the first time, the human saw her expression soften. Gratitude. But then her voice broke again. She spoke a string of words, pointing to the burning ship, then pointing upward toward the stars. Her tone was filled with grief and anger. He realized the truth. Her family, her people, her husband, gone. The fire had taken them, and she was left alone with her child. Alone except for him. The human sat back, thinking quickly. He knew taking her and the child with him would be dangerous. His orders were clear. Avoid interference, avoid risk. Helping her meant breaking rules, stepping into conflict that was not his. But looking into her eyes, he knew he could not leave her here. The woman must have sensed his hesitation because she suddenly leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his chest. Her voice cracked, whispering again and again. Words he did not understand, but feelings he could not ignore. She was begging, not just for food or shelter. She was begging him to save them, to give them a chance to live. The human closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the faint heartbeat of the child against the silence. He thought of Earth, of the families he had seen, of the children who played under skies untouched by war. And then he looked at her, an alien widow, a mother fighting for her child with nothing left. A decision settled inside him like stone. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "I'll protect you," he said firmly. "Both of you." She did not understand the words, but she felt the tone. Her tears fell freely now, but they were tears of release. Her body relaxed slightly, as if a great weight had lifted. For the first time since he found her, she allowed herself to believe in hope. The night deepened. Ash still drifted across the air, and the wreck behind them finally grew quiet, flames dying into glowing embers. But the silence no longer felt empty. It carried meaning now. It carried a promise. The human knew he could not stay here. The wreck would attract scavengers, raiders, maybe even the ones who had attacked. They had to move before dawn. He helped the woman to her feet, steadying her as she clutched the baby close. Step by step, they began to walk away from the grave of her people. The wind whispered across the barren land, but the human walked tall, his rifle ready, his resolve stronger than steel. Behind him, the fire of the destroyed ship faded into the distance. Ahead of him, unknown dangers waited, but he did not waver. Because he was no longer walking for himself. He was walking for them. The widow, her baby, and the fragile thread of life that tied them together, and in her silent plea, he had found something stronger than fear. He had found a reason to fight. The wasteland was silent, but silence was not safety. The human knew this well. Every battlefield he had walked before had the same hush after the fire, the same emptiness that came just before danger returned. The alien widow followed him closely, clutching her child against her chest. Her steps were unsteady, but her will was iron. She did not complain, did not slow down. Her silver eyes scanned the darkness like a hunted animal, knowing they were not alone. The human paused on a ridge of black stone. From here, the wrecked ship was still visible in the distance. The flames had dimmed to glowing orange, smoke curling into the stars. But something else caught his attention. Movement, a faint shimmer among the wreckage. Shapes shifting in the firelight, too quick, too silent to be natural. His visor flickered as his sensors tried to lock on. Nothing clear, just shadows. He raised his rifle slowly, his muscles tightened, senses sharp. He had seen this before, the aftermath of an attack, when raiders returned to strip the dead or hunters searched for survivors. The widow noticed his sudden stillness. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered something sharp in her own tongue, pointing back toward the wreck. Fear clouded her face. She knew those shadows. The human's heart pounded. He crouched low, motioning for her to stay behind the rocks. She obeyed without question, wrapping her child tighter, hiding its small face against her shoulder. Through the night, he watched. The figures moved with purpose. They were not scavengers. Scavengers made noise, argued over scraps, fought each other for metal. These shadows were organized. They searched carefully, methodically, like predators looking for prey. And prey meant her. The human cursed under his breath. Whoever these hunters were, they had not come just to destroy the ship. They had come to make sure no one lived. One of the figures lifted a device glowing red in the dark. A scanner. Its beam swept across the wreck, then across the sand. Slowly, it turned toward the ridge, toward them. The human pressed his back to the rock, pulling the widow closer. He could feel her trembling. The child gave a soft whimper, and the mother quickly pressed her lips against its hair, trying to quiet it. The red beam passed just over their heads. For a moment, it lingered. His breath froze in his chest. If the scanner caught even the faintest life sign, they would be exposed. Then, at last, it moved away. The human exhaled slowly, but his relief was short. The hunters began to spread out, moving from the wreck toward the open desert. Their search was widening. They were not going to stop until they found survivors. He looked at the widow. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, but also with a question. What now? The human thought quickly. Fighting here would be suicide. Too many enemies, too much open ground. He needed to move them to cover, somewhere the scanners could not reach. He pointed toward a jagged canyon in the distance, dark shadows stretching across its walls. A place to hide. He whispered firmly, "We go." The widow nodded, understanding without words. They moved low and fast, slipping across the rocks. Every sound felt like thunder in the silence. The crunch of gravel under boots, the faint rattle of metal against his armor, the baby's small breath. Each step was measured, each heartbeat a countdown. Behind them, the hunters drew closer. The red beam scanned across the ground, lighting the night like ghostly fire. Halfway to the canyon, A sharp crack split the air. A drone lifted into the sky, its wings beating with mechanical rhythm. Its eyes glowed blue as it swept the ground with harsh light. The widow froze in fear. The baby stirred, letting out a tiny cry. The human acted instantly. He pulled them both into a shallow ditch, covering them with his body. The drone's light passed over, scanning the ground. His hand pressed against the widow's back, steadying her, silently urging her not to move. Seconds felt like hours. The drone hovered, scanning again, then flew toward the wreckage. The human released a tense breath. They could not wait any longer. He pulled her up, guiding her quickly toward the canyon. At last they reached the shadows of the stone walls. The canyon stretched narrow and twisting, the kind of place where scanners would have difficulty penetrating. Safe, at least for the moment. The widow leaned against the rock, clutching her child, gasping for breath. Sweat and tears streaked her face, but her spirit remained unbroken. She looked at him, her lips moving. Though he could not understand the words, her tone was clear, gratitude mixed with fear. The human nodded. He knew this was only the beginning. The shadows in the wreckage were still searching. They would not give up, and soon they would find tracks, signs, something that led them here. He checked his rifle, his jaw tightening. The night was far from over. But as he looked at the widow and her child, fragile, desperate, yet still alive, he made a silent vow. The hunters would not take them, not while he breathed. And in that canyon of shadows, the human understood. The real war had just begun. The canyon walls rose high on both sides, jagged teeth of black stone cutting into the sky. The human led the way, his rifle ready, his boots crunching lightly on the gravel path. Behind him, the alien widow clutched her child close to her chest, her bare feet slipping now and then on the rough ground. The baby whimpered softly, the sound small but dangerous in the still air. Night cloaked the desert, but the hunters were still searching. Red beams from their scanners swept across the open land, stabbing the dark like blades of fire. Every flicker of light reminded the human that they were not safe. They had only borrowed time. The human's mind worked quickly. He knew the canyon would shield them for a while, but the enemy would widen their search. Once they realized survivors had escaped, they would release more drones, more hounds. He had seen this pattern before. The hunters would not rest until no life remained. He slowed his pace for the widow. She stumbled, weak from exhaustion. Sweat gleamed on her silver skin and her arms trembled from holding the child for so long. Still, she did not complain. She walked because she had no choice. Her child's life depended on it. The human finally stopped near a bend in the canyon, pressing his hand against the rough stone. He motioned for her to rest for a moment. She sank to her knees, holding the baby against her shoulder. The infant cried again, louder this time. Her eyes widened in fear, and she rocked the child quickly, whispering soft words in her own language. The human crouched beside them. "We need to keep him quiet," he whispered, though he knew she did not understand. Still, his tone carried the urgency. She nodded, biting her lip as tears slipped down her face. Suddenly, a faint buzzing filled the canyon. The human's blood ran cold. A drone. He grabbed the widow's arm and pulled her against the rock wall. Above, the buzzing grew louder, echoing off the stones. A pale blue light swept across the canyon floor. The human pressed his hand over the widow's shoulder, steadying her, while his other hand gripped his rifle tightly. The baby squirmed, a tiny cry breaking the silence. The drone slowed, its blue eye locking onto the sound. The human made his choice instantly. He leapt from cover, rolling into the open, and fired. A burst of plasma ripped through the night, striking the drone. Sparks showered as the machine spun wildly, crashing against the canyon wall before exploding in a flash of fire. The widow gasped, clutching her child tighter. The baby wailed at the sudden blast. The sound carried far through the canyon. The human cursed under his breath. The hunters would have heard that. Their time was running out. He pulled the widow to her feet. "Move!" he barked. She did not understand the word, but his urgency was clear. Together they ran, deeper into the canyon. The night became a blur of stone and shadow. The human's breath came hard, his eyes scanning every corner for danger. Behind them, faint howls rose in the distance, mechanical hounds, unleashed by the hunters. Their metal claws scraped against the rocks, their voices sharp and cruel. The widow stumbled again, nearly falling. The human caught her, pulling her forward with one hand while firing blindly behind them with the other. Plasma bolts lit the canyon walls, shadows dancing with each flash. The hound's howls grew louder. They were closing in. At last, the canyon split into a wider chamber, a hollow space hidden between the cliffs. The human pushed the widow and her child inside, then turned to face the narrow entrance. His rifle hummed as he powered it up, ready for the fight. The widow crouched in the shadows, rocking her child, her eyes never leaving him. She whispered prayers in her broken voice, her tears glinting in the faint light. She was not begging anymore. She was waiting to see if this human would truly keep his promise. The first hound appeared at the entrance, its metal body glowing faint red, eyes burning with hunger. It let out a sharp, piercing cry and leapt forward. The human fired. The blast tore through the machine, sending fragments across the rocks. Another followed, then another. Each one came faster, metal claws scraping, metal jaws snapping. The human stood firm, his rifle spitting fire, each shot precise. Sparks and smoke filled the air as machines fell, one after another. But for every hound destroyed, more arrived, his rifle overheated, glowing red. He cursed, slamming it against the stone to cool it. Sweat poured down his face, his chest rising and falling like a drumbeat. But then, the howls stopped. Silence filled the canyon once more. The ground was littered with broken metal bodies, their glowing eyes dark. The human lowered his rifle slowly, scanning for more. None came. Behind him, the widow rose shakily to her feet. She stepped toward him, her child still held close. Her eyes were wide, shining with something new. Not just fear, not just relief, but trust. She reached out with her free hand, touching his arm, gently. Her lips moved, forming words he could not understand, but the meaning was clear. She was thanking him. The human nodded. He did not need translation, but deep inside he knew the truth. This night was not over. The hunters would come again, stronger, angrier. He had won a small fight, nothing more. Still, as he looked at the widow and her child, trembling but alive, he knew one thing for certain. He would keep fighting. He would keep running. He would not let the shadows take them. And under the cold stars, deep in the canyon's heart, the flight through the night continued. The canyon opened into a wide plateau where the land dropped suddenly into shadows. At the far end, hidden among jagged cliffs, the human saw what he had been searching for, his outpost. It was small and rough, built from steel plates and stone walls, a place meant only for short missions. But tonight, it would have to become a fortress. The human guided the alien widow and her child inside. The steel door groaned as it shut behind them. He activated the locks, sealing the only entrance. The air inside smelled of oil and dust, but it was safer than the canyon. The widow sank to the floor, rocking her baby gently. Her silver eyes looked around the room, scanning the strange devices and glowing panels. She did not understand this place, but she understood safety, at least for now. The human wasted no time. He moved through the outpost quickly, checking power levels, setting up defenses. The walls shook faintly from distant echoes. Shadows were moving outside. The hunters had followed them. He returned to the door, his rifle strapped across his chest. He crouched beside the widow, his voice low but steady. "We'll be safe here, but we must fight if they come." She could not understand his words, but she understood his tone. Her hand touched his sleeve, trembling but firm. Her eyes told him she trusted him completely. The baby stirred, letting out a small cry. The human winced. The sound seemed too loud, too sharp in the silence. Outside, the howls of mechanical hounds answered like wolves calling to each other. The attack began. A heavy thud shook the door, then another. The steel groaned, sparks jumping from its hinges. The human grabbed his, Rifle bracing himself. Shadows shifted under the narrow cracks, red eyes glowing in the dark. He opened fire. The blast echoed through the outpost, lighting the doorway with flashes of blue fire. Sparks flew as metal claws reached through the gap. The widow pressed her, back to the wall, clutching her baby tightly. Her lips moved quickly, whispering words of prayer. She did not close her eyes. She watched him, desperate but hopeful. The human fought like a man possessed. Each shot was precise, every move calculated. He switched between rifle and sidearm, blasting drones that tried to fly through openings, cutting down hounds that slammed against the walls. The outpost shook under the storm, but he stood firm, his jaw set, his eyes burning with determination. A loud crack split the air. One of the side walls buckled as a raider forced its way in, a tall figure in black armor, its mask glowing with red symbols. It raised a blade, stepping toward the widow. The human spun, firing without hesitation. The raider fell, its armor smoking as it collapsed beside her. The widow gasped, shielding her baby from the sparks, then looked at the human with wide, grateful eyes. But more kept coming. The human pulled a lever on the wall, activating a defense system. Metal turrets whirred to life, spraying fire at the doorway. The outpost filled with noise, smoke, and light. The hunters screamed as they fell one by one, but the pressure did not stop. The widow's child began to cry, the sound sharp and frantic. She tried to calm him, but fear filled her own heart. She pressed him close, covering his ears, tears streaming down her face. The human saw them, saw the fragility of the child, the desperation of the mother, and something inside him hardened. This was no longer just a battle for survival. This was a battle for family. He charged forward, standing in the doorway, firing into the swarm. His armor burned, his arms ached, but he did not fall. Every breath was fire, every heartbeat a hammer. He roared as he fought a lone human against the storm. Finally, silence returned. The last raider collapsed, its body smoking on the floor. The air was thick with smoke and dust. The walls of the outpost were scarred, blackened from fire, but still standing. The human lowered his rifle slowly. His chest rose and fell heavily. His arms trembled, but his eyes remained sharp. Behind him, the widow rose shakily to her feet. She stepped closer, holding her child. Her lips moved, whispering words he did not know. But the way she looked at him, the way her eyes softened, spoke louder than any language. She did not see him only as a soldier now. She saw him as something more. Protector, shield. A man who had risked everything for her and her child. The baby reached out a small hand, grasping the air toward him. The human looked at the child, then at the widow, and a strange warmth filled his chest. The outpost was battered. The night was not over. The hunters might return. But for this moment, they had survived. Together, the widow's plea had become his promise. And in that small outpost, standing among smoke and ruin, a human and an alien widow began to build something stronger than walls. Something that no enemy could easily break. The smoke inside the outpost finally began to thin. Broken metal and burned machines littered the floor, their glowing eyes long gone. The human stood in silence, breathing heavily, his rifle still warm in his hands. Every muscle in his body ached, but his mind was sharper than ever. He had survived battles before, but none like this, none that carried the weight of two fragile lives behind him. The widow remained in the corner, her child pressed against her chest. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, wide and unblinking, as if she feared he might vanish like the others she had lost. The baby's cries had softened now, replaced by small hiccups, the kind only exhaustion brings. The human finally lowered his weapon and stepped closer. The widow flinched at first, then stilled. He crouched low, his voice steady but gentle. "It's over. You're safe. For now." She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but something in his tone reached her. Slowly, she let the child's tiny hand stretch toward him. The human hesitated, then extended his finger. The baby's soft fingers curled around it, gripping. With surprising strength, a strange warmth filled his chest. He had faced armies. He had seen entire cities burn, yet nothing had struck him as deeply as this fragile touch. The widow whispered something, her voice soft, broken by grief, but touched with gratitude. She pressed her forehead lightly against her child's head, then looked at the human again. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. The human wanted to tell her she was safe, that he would protect them both, but he knew words meant little without action. So instead he stood and moved through the outpost, repairing what he could. He set up emergency barriers, reinforced the door, and checked his supplies. Food was limited. Ammunition was running low. Yet his resolve did not waver. When he returned, the widow had placed the baby gently in a makeshift cradle of cloth and metal scraps. She herself leaned weakly against the wall, exhaustion pressing down on her slender frame. Still, when the human offered her water and a small ration pack, she accepted with quiet dignity. She ate slowly, carefully. Every bite she took, she first broke in half, feeding her child before herself. Watching her, the human felt respect growing inside him. She was not just surviving, she was enduring. Her strength was not in weapons or armor, but in the unshakable will of a mother. Later, when the baby slept, she looked at him again. Her lips moved, shaping words he did not know, but then she did something more powerful than language. She placed her palm against her chest, then touched her hand lightly to his arm. It was a gesture older than any war, older than any border. Gratitude, trust, a bond forming in the ashes of battle. The human nodded, his jaw tightening. He felt something shifting inside him. She was no longer just a stranger he had rescued. She was no longer just a widow from a fallen ship. She and her child had become his responsibility. His family, whether by blood or not, outside, the night, was still alive with distant howls and the hum of patrol drones. The hunters had not given up. The human knew they would return, stronger, more prepared. But in this small pause, he allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years: connection. He sat across from her, cleaning his rifle. She watched him silently, her silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of the power core. At one point, the child stirred and whimpered. The human surprised himself by rising quickly and rocking the cradle gently until the baby settled again. The widow stared, her lips parting slightly in shock. Then slowly she smiled. It was faint, fragile, but it lit her face in a way that pierced the human's heart. For a moment, the walls of the outpost, the smoke of battle, the danger outside, they all faded. There was only her, the child, and him. Three souls bound not by duty or blood, but by fire, by survival, by choice. He thought of his own past, of the comrades he had lost, of the emptiness he carried for so long. For the first time, that emptiness felt a little less heavy. The widow reached out again, this time placing her hand gently on his. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but the message was clear. She did not see him as just a soldier anymore. She saw him as hope, as protector, as something closer to family. The human squeezed her hand gently, then released it, rising to his feet. His voice was firm. "They'll be back. We'll be ready." She could not understand the words, but when he picked up his rifle and stood tall, she nodded. Their bond had been forged in fire, and from that fire something unbreakable had risen. The night was not done. The hunters would return. But now, he would not fight alone. For every bullet he fired, every step he took, was no longer for survival. It was for them, for the widow, for the child, for the family he never expected to find in the ashes of war. Dawn crept slowly over the wasteland. The sky, once black and burning with smoke, now glowed faint orange as the sun broke through the clouds of ash. The outpost stood battered but unbroken, its walls scarred from the long night of battle. The human stepped outside, scanning the horizon. The wreck of the alien ship was little more than twisted metal now, smoke rising faintly from its bones. No more drones circled above. No more hunters crept in the shadows. For the first time since he had arrived, the world was quiet. Behind him, the steel door creaked open. The alien widow stepped into the pale light, her child cradled gently in her arms. Her silver eyes blinked against the dawn, tired but shining. She looked at the man, then at the sky, as if searching for something far away. The human lowered his weapon and walked back to her. He spoke softly, though he knew she could not understand the words. "It's over. You're safe now." She tilted, her head, listening not to his words but to his tone. A faint smile touched her lips, weak but real. The baby stirred, reaching tiny hands toward the sky. The human watched, his chest tightening. He had fought for many reasons in his life. Orders, duty, survival, but never for this, never for the fragile hope of a mother and her child. Inside the outpost, the human began packing supplies. His mission was over. The distress beacon no longer called him. But as he looked at the widow sitting quietly with her child, he knew he could not leave them behind. The galaxy was wide, cruel, and merciless. Alone they would not last. With him they had a chance. When he returned to her side, he tapped his chest and then pointed gently to them. His voice was low, steady. "Family." The widow's eyes widened. She did not understand the word, but she understood the gesture. Slowly, with trembling hands, she copied him, tapping her own chest, then pointing to him. Her lips formed a sound, soft and broken but filled with meaning. The child giggled, clapping tiny hands as if sealing the bond. Something shifted inside the human. For years he had been alone, drifting from mission to mission, carrying scars that no one else could see. But now, in the ashes of war, he had found something worth more than any victory. He had found a reason to stay, a reason to protect, a reason to live. The day passed slowly. He repaired what he could of the outpost while the widow cared for the baby. At one point he noticed her humming softly, a melody foreign but beautiful. The child cooed in response, smiling in her arms. The sound filled the small outpost with warmth, pushing back the echoes of fire and screams. By evening, the human had made his decision. They could not remain here. The hunters might return and the wasteland held no future. He would take them away, far beyond this broken planet. He guided them to his small landing craft. The widow hesitated at the ramp, clutching her child, eyes filled with both fear and hope. The human extended his hand to her once more, the same way he had in the burning wreckage. She looked at him for a long moment, then placed her hand in his. Together, they stepped inside. The ship lifted slowly, engines humming against the silence. The ground fell away, the canyon shrinking, the outpost becoming a scar in the land. Higher and higher they rose until the stars stretched wide before them. The widow pressed her forehead against the viewport, her eyes glistening as she watched the planet fade behind them. The child giggled again, reaching toward the endless lights of space. The human sat in the pilot's chair, his gaze steady on the stars. But for the first time, he was not staring into emptiness. For the first time, he was not alone. Behind him, the widow whispered softly, a word in her own language. Though he did not know its meaning, he felt its weight. He turned slightly, meeting her eyes. She smiled faintly, holding her child close. And in that smile, he understood. She had lost her people. She had lost her husband. She had lost her world. But she had found him. And he, who had walked alone for so long, had found them, not strangers anymore, not burdens, not survivors, family. The ship drifted into the darkness of space, leaving behind fire and ruin, carrying with it something far more powerful than weapons or machines. A bond forged in silence, sealed in battle, and carried beyond the stars. The human looked once more at the widow and her child. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried across the cabin. "You'll never be alone again." And with that promise, their journey began.